We want to welcome you back to First Christian Church, our Sunday school lesson for today. And as you can see, I've got my helper Clementine with us, and we're going to together spend a little time talking about Genesis 13. And old Clementine's had a tough week this week. She had surgery, and as young kittens usually do, and so she's a little ornery, aren't you? And she's been a little tired too, but she's been a good girl. She's handled it well. We're proud of her. So, do you want to learn about Abraham and Lot today? She does. So, we're going to talk a little bit about a situation that most of you have probably dealt with. Have you ever had a friend take advantage of you? You were really nice to them and they kind of took advantage of that and they weren't nice back, and how upsetting that was to you. And so the Bible story today is essentially that situation, and it deals with Abraham and Lot. And if you remember, Lot was Abraham's nephew. They had left the southern part of Mesopotamia and moved up to Haran and then down to the promised land that God had promised to Abraham's descendants, which Abraham still doesn't have any children yet. Then Abraham went to Egypt, and remember, he kind of fibbed to the Pharaoh about his wife, but somehow worked his way out of that situation. And then now he's back into the promised land, which is modern day Israel. And he's moved to the Negev desert, which is the very southern part of Israel, or Canaan, which is what it was called at that time, Canaan. So he's moved there, him and Lot. It's kind of a desert region. There's not a lot of water, not a lot of things for livestock to eat. And Abraham and Lot both had a lot of livestock, so that was a problem. And eventually, a lot of the people who were running Abraham's livestock and Lot's livestock were kind of arguing and bickering, disagreeing a lot. Sound familiar to today? And so Abraham and Lot kind of sat down and just talked it out and said, Abraham, who was the senior and who had done so many wonderful things for Lot, essentially given Lot everything he had, said to Lot, you know what, this land won't support both of us. Why don't you pick a region, and you'll take your livestock and your family there, and I'll take the other region and I'll move there. And so the story tells us in Genesis 13 that Lot looked around and he saw where over near the Jordan River, the area was really nicer. There was water and things for his livestock to eat, and the other side really wasn't so good. And so Lot said, I'll take the better half. You take the bad half, Abraham. And I'm sure that hurt Abraham a little bit because, Abraham had been so generous to him over the years, and yet Lot still just took. But to Abraham's credit, he honored his promise to Lot, and so he allowed Lot to take the better half, the Jordan Valley that was so fertile, and he and his livestock went over there. And Abraham and his livestock and family took the not so good half. And I'm sure there was a lot of disappointment among his family and the people who worked for him in that. But Abraham stood strong and stuck with his decision. And now remember, Abraham still doesn't have children yet, and God had been promising Abraham that your descendants would be so many you can't even count, as many as the stars in the sky. And Abraham's like, okay, God, that's fine, but can we start with at least one? I would like to have one, please. And we don't have that yet. And so I'm sure Abraham's getting a little discouraged. But nonetheless, God told him, your descendants will be as many as the dust of the earth, I think is the phrase the Bible uses. More than the dust of the earth. Think about how much dust. There's a lot of dust just in my house. I can't imagine how all the dust in the earth, what number that is. So in honor of God, Abraham built an altar to worship him. And an altar is just a physical structure. It can take all kinds of forms, but generally we think of it as kind of a rectangular, like a box that you build. And a lot of times it's out of rocks back then. And it's a rectangle where you can kind of pray on it, or sometimes you can sacrifice on it in the older days. But it was a way to focus in on God and what he might want for you to do and really to converse with him. And so he built an altar there. And then the story changes. We switch back to Lot, and he's over near the southern Jordan River. And we have, at this point in time, the first recorded war in the Bible. It's 4 kings versus 5 kings. And the 4 kings were led by Chedorlaomer. And he and his group of people went and fought the 5 kings. And you would think the 5 kings would have the advantage, but they didn't. Chedorlaomer's army, those 4 kings, were more powerful, and they were winning the battles one after another, just laying waste to the 5 kings and their cities. And during that, they actually took Lot, his wife and family and all of his livestock, captive. They kidnapped them and then started to take them back to their land up in the northern part there in the Middle East, where we would later known as be Assyria, but we'll talk about that later. So the 5 kings take Lot to be like North Israel, that area, and they're camping out, and somebody got loose from Lot's group and ran back to Abraham, where Abraham was, in the southern part of Israel, a long way down, and told Abraham, your nephew Lot and his family have been taken captive. Now, Abraham could have said, Lot got what he deserved. I'm not doing anything. I'm sure he was still a little upset about what Lot had done. But that's not what Abraham did. Abraham went among his employees there, the people who worked with him, got a force of 380 men, and they marched all the way to the north part of the country up there in northern Canaan, found where Chedorlaomer was and where he was keeping Lot, and attacked him and won the battle and was able to save Lot and his family and all of his livestock. I mean, in very dramatic fashion, because Chedorlaomer had a pretty good-sized army, and they would not be defeated easily. And nonetheless, Abraham was able to do that and save Lot and bring him back home. And it was just a remarkable rescue effort that I'm sure Lot was very thankful for. And afterwards, we have this very unique story. Abraham just won this huge battle. I'm sure word spread out on whatever Twitter was back then in the 2000 BC, whatever they were using, word spread like crazy, because the next part of the story tells us that 2 kings from the area, a king from Salem and a king from Sodom, came up to Abraham where he was. And the king of Sodom tried to bribe Abraham into liking him by saying, here, I'll give you this, I'll give you this. You're a powerful man, I want you to like me, so I'll be cool too. But the king of Salem, which at that time would be really close to where Jerusalem is today, he took a different approach. His name was Melchizedek. And Melchizedek said, you are an honored man, Abraham, a man of God. And Abraham realized that he was a righteous man, Melchizedek was, and called him the priest of the God Most High. And which was it's a huge compliment at that time. And Abraham thought so much of Melchizedek, he gave Melchizedek, the priest of the God Most High, 1/10 of what he had to Melchizedek, and which Melchizedek graciously accepted on behalf of God and God's glory. And then the king of Sodom was sent home and said, I will not be bribed, Abraham said. So a lot of people use that story as the basis on what they should tithe to the church. I don't know if that's correct or not, the 1/10 that is, but we certainly should give back to God all of our blessings. There's no question about that. I'll let you decide what you think is the proper amount. But a lot of people look to this for guidance in their tithing. And so anyway, the story goes on, and we have a situation here where, the lesson to learn, Abraham was betrayed by a friend, a family member even. And yet, despite that betrayal, when that family member needed Abraham, he was there in the most necessary way. When Lot's life was in danger and he was going to lose everything, Abraham came to his rescue despite their differences. And God commands us to love and to help our friends or even our enemies when they are in need. We are not to laugh or make fun or mock them when they're down. And that's very important, especially in this time when there's different people. People feel very differently from political standpoints. They feel very differently. If obviously if you feel like the person was successful that you like, we don't need to make fun of the ones who didn't. And if you weren't on the successful end, we don't need to make fun or sour milk on the other one. We need to come together and be civil and respectful to one another, regardless of our beliefs and our differences. And that's what this lesson tells us today is, don't kick a person when they're down. Help them out, regardless of what they may have done to you in the past. And that's really hard to do, I know. And also, God also teaches us in this lesson to give back to Him our blessings. Whether that's 1/10 or some other amount, that we are always to give the blessings, not because God needs them. He doesn't need them. He's got everything He needs. But because we should give back to Him. We need to give back to Him to say thank you to Him. Because you don't want to be the person that's just always taking, and mooching off someone. You want to be a person who gives back and says thank you. And by doing the give back, you are saying thank you. Now, turning to our workbook, I believe we were up to page 67 we had finished. So I'm going to have you do pages 68 through 73. So that's not very many, I think 5 or 6 pages there. And we're going to do a little bit more work on our chapters and our verses. And I think there's a little bit more focus on these chapters and verses here to give you some more practice. You should be getting them a little better use now. So when I quote like Genesis chapter 13, you should be able to find that now in the Bible. Again, Genesis is the very first book. And you should be, I encourage you to read that chapter. It's a great story, a lot of drama, a lot of just good substantive stuff. So take some time, read through that chapter, think about what it means to you, and apply it in your life. And I hope this lesson's been helpful to you, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and God bless you.